Alan gets the Reader with Endurance Award. It's a long story, but it's difficult to break up that story, for the different pieces are connected. We had first half, or the second third, I guess, this week, and we'll finish it next week. But we've missed one significant story as we've been going through Genesis, and that was the Tower of Babel, and it's in chapter 11. And there's a thread that starts there that's important for the rest of the story of Abram and Sarai, and so it's important to go back and pick it up quick. So the people decide they want to build a city, and they want to build a big tower in the city that goes all the way up to the heavens just for fun. They say, let's do it. Let's make a name for ourselves through the building of this city, and then God won't scatter us across the face of the earth. It's clear that they want to take matters into their own hands, and they believe that their achievements will be their security. Well, then God doesn't like the tower and scatters them about anyway. The achievement wasn't their security. Trust in God was, and they messed it up. Then in chapter 12, God calls Abram and says this, "Leave your father's house, go to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation and bless you, and I will make your name great." I'm in the driver's seat, God says. Just follow my call for you, and I'll give you the accomplishment and the achievement and security that you need. Just follow my directive. And Abram and Sarai say, "You got it, God. Sounds great. We're on our way. Here we go." And they're 75 years old, or Abram is 75 years old at this point. Our story for today starts in chapter 16, and Abram is now 85. 10 years have gone by, and nothing has happened yet. And Genesis is, shall we say, generous with ages. Abram lives to 175 years old, so we have to be careful focusing too much on arithmetic in Genesis. But the Bible's clearly saying that 10 years is a long time has gone by, and God has done nothing to move towards the fulfillment of these promises. And Sarai starts to get stressed out. After all, she's responsible for making a nation. That means babies, and that's her department. God promised a nation to them when she was already very advanced in age for childbearing years. And so one would figure that God realized that time's a ticking away and something should happen fast. But they've been at it for 10 years, Abram and Sarai, and nothing has happened. So Sarai decides to take matters into her own hands. She says, "Abram, I have a young Egyptian slave girl named Hagar. I'll give her to you as your wife. Maybe you are to build a nation through her and not through me," she says. Now, even if we hadn't read the Tower of Babel story, all you need is a few episodes of Friends to know that this isn't going to work out well. Hey, if you watch Friends, you know that Ross and Rachel are in a central relationship. In the middle of the whole series, they decide to go on a break, but Rachel isn't ready for them to go on a break. Ross gets in another, or involved with another woman immediately, like that night, and Rachel isn't ready for that. Okay, everything goes bad. Well, the same is true here for Abram. He takes Hagar as his wife upon the recommendation of Sarai, but Sarai's head is thinking one thing while her heart is feeling something completely different. Hagar conceives, and Sarai goes crazy. She starts yelling at Abram. She's paranoid, thinking that Hagar is looking down on her now that she has power of the baby in her womb. Abram tries to get out of the middle of this. Good luck, Abram, right? You don't have much chance. And he says, "She's your slave. You do what you want. You do what you want." And Sarai treats Hagar harshly, so harshly, in fact, that Hagar runs away. She leaves. Joanne Thompson is a member of our conference staff, and she said to me once that, "You know you're working with the Spirit when the hard things become easy." And here in this story, everything is becoming hard for Abram and Sarai. They're working against God and not with God. Well, God cares for Hagar when they're out in the wilderness, and we'll talk more about that next week. Ishmael is born, and then 13 more years go on before God appears to Abram and Sarai again. Abram is now 99 years old. And God appears and says, "Abram, I still promise to make a great nation through you, and I'm going to do this through you and Sarai, just as I said, 24 years ago now." Well, Abram is doubting his virility at this point. He says to God, did you see that I already have Ishmael? I mean, not a bad achievement at 85. Can we please just work with what's already here? And God says, no. Isaac will be born by Sarai soon. Well, then God appears to Abram and Sarai through these spooky travelers that show up. And they tell Abram that they'll be back again this year, or next year at this time. And at that time, Sarah will have a son. And Sarah laughs. Ha! Whatever, she says. And God says, hey, why'd you laugh? She says, oh, I didn't laugh. Yes, you did laugh. No, yes, you did. It's really funny in the Bible, but it's right there. Well, as we read this story, we can see that God is slowly moving toward promise, toward the fulfillment of this blessing. We can see it as outsiders, as readers of the story. But Abram and Sarai can't see it. First, they try to take matters into their own hands. And then, when that doesn't work, they just give up hope. They can't possibly imagine how God can bring this promise about. How can God change things? How can God change this? If it's taken this long, then certainly God must have forgotten, or maybe God just isn't that powerful anyway. I think the Bible does a good job of showing how agonizing waiting for blessing in our lives can be. But it's seldom a noticed part of this story. It's one thing to hear God's promise of blessing. It's another thing entirely to wait for it. I've been reading a book by theologian Sally McFaig titled Life Abundant, and I found these lines helpful this week. She writes, God is not a being in whom we should believe, but the breath of life in every being that exists. God is not a possibility within reality, but reality itself. To say yes to God is simply to trust reality. It is to acknowledge that reality is good. But when we step fully into the shoes of Abram and Sarai, as they are in their waiting time, we remember that the waiting times in life are very, very hard. They can be so hard that we despair. We lose hope. We can't believe that anything could possibly change. There are also simply times when it doesn't feel like reality is good, and it's important not to deny this. Well, my week has been shaped by the event that's happened in Mineral Point this week, the tragedy that I mentioned during the prayers, the death of Bailey Vogel. My heart's been broken by that event. And I spent time on Thursday at the high school as one of the counselors available to the student body. The anguish expressed in those conversations was gut-wrenching. Students and staff expressed shock. How could this happen? I just talked with her yesterday. They told of a sleepless night, and many shared that they had been sick to their stomachs. They rehearsed hundreds of if-onlys. If only I had done this, or if only I had said this, or if only I had known how dangerous this situation was. They expressed sorrow and heartache for the family, and they told stories of a girl who was smart, who made them laugh a lot, but who had become increasingly withdrawn and quiet over the last few weeks. One student, as we talked, wanted me to preach, to share some magic words of comfort, to make sense of it all, to say something that would push the sadness away. And I said, there are no words like that today. Today is for grieving, for being close to your friends, and through that perhaps you'll know that God is grieving too. I wondered about Bailey. We all did, I think, that day. I think we all do. We wonder what it was that weighed on her so heavily. The story isn't simple, it's complicated, and I don't know much of it.